Hey everybody, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest, and in January we're really putting a heavy emphasis on regulations and legislation. So today I have with me Wendi Wilkes. She is the Manager of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. We're going to talk a little bit about what's on the horizon and what you guys should be thinking about going into 2021. So Wendi, thank you for being on the call. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you for having me. This is my first time doing something like this, so I'm really excited.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here. You're very opinionated on Twitter, and I love seeing all the stuff that you have out there on what's going on in the water industry. So I guess we'll start more specifically with things that are going on. What are the critical regulatory things that you and your membership are keeping in mind as we look into 2021?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a really busy time. There's a lot going on. Anytime you have an administration change, like what we're going to be going through in January, it's really hectic, right? The current administration is trying to get as much as they can done, essentially, before they leave office. And the new administration is starting to gear up, what do we want to do in our first 100 days? So it's really busy. Always keeps us on our toes. So first, I should say that it's going to take a little bit of time for EPA to get settled after January 20th. Political leadership's going to have to get, the appointees are going to have to get confirmed by the Senate, and it's just going to take some time to get the lay of the land. We've heard a lot from the new administrations, their priorities. Two of the ones that really rise to the top in relation to water are going to be climate change and environmental justice. So that means for water, we're probably going to see some more activity from EPA around like water security initiatives for scarcity and infrastructure adaptation for climate change. We'll also probably see an evaluation of how affordability is looked at by the agency, and could see some changes. There have been some changes, particularly on the wastewater side, from EPA out of WRFIC updating the affordability guidance. But we might see some more of that. And then, of course, PFAS are going to be a big issue with this administration. We're likely going to see a federal MCL. And then everybody's favorite, the lead and copper rule. And, so I'll talk a little bit about that. So looking at EPA's 2021 schedule, there's a few things they're a little bit behind on. We expected to see the final lead and copper rule actually back in the fall, and I was expecting it before the election. I think a lot of other people were. That didn't happen. As you all know, the lead and copper rule is still at the Office of Management and Budget. So that means that it's still being reviewed. It'll go back to EPA, reviewed by the White House. It'll go back to EPA, and then it will get eventually published in the Federal Register. But that process can take a couple weeks. So even once it leaves OMB, it could be 2 to 4, maybe even longer than that, before the final rule is published. So we're looking at a really tight deadline if we're going to see a final lead and copper rule before the administration change. Now, if it's not finalized, the Biden administration will have the opportunity to reevaluate it. And there's a couple of things that they could probably change to kind of make it their own relatively quickly, or it might be a full reevaluation, which I'm not sure. Well, there might be some people out there who want that, but a lot of us are, trying to figure out how to plan our resources for 2021. And for many utilities and for states too, and I'm sure lots of consultants who work on this, they're trying to figure out how is this going to play into 2021. And, especially because the proposed lead and copper rule has a lot of early implementation activities. So TBD.
Yeah.
I do think we will see, I'm thinking we'll see first quarter an LCRR published, but that's just me looking at my crystal ball. So don't take it to the bank.
Yeah.
So some other big things going on, earlier this year, the fourth regulatory determination proposal was published, and that included the positive determination for MCL for PFOA and PFAS. That is on a 5-year cycle, and it needs to be published. The final needs to go out January 2021. So I think we'll see that pretty quick, but it's not yet at OMB. So EPA has not sent that to OMB. So we're still looking at some time there. The 5th contaminant candidate list under the Safe Drinking Water Act. We're expecting the draft in 2021. And that'll have to be final. I think it's statutory in July 2022. The fifth unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, the proposal is at OMB right now. And that is going to be final in 2021. We're all very interested to see what water systems are going to be sampling for, and starting in 2023, that gives us our national current database. So I think the associations and utilities are all very interested to see what ends up in UCMR 5. We do know that based on legislation in the National Defense Authorization Act, there are, I think it's 29 PFAS contaminants that we have analytical methods for will have to be on that UCMR 5.
Mm-hmm.
There's two other rules that were that Congress asked EPA to create in the AWIA legislation from 2018. That's the America's Water Infrastructure Act. And that's the Water System Restructuring Rule and the Consumer Confidence Reports Revision Rule. And both of those in statute, the deadline was October 2020. EPA kind of blew past that. They're still working on it internally, and we don't really have a timeline for when that will be out, but it's coming, and we haven't seen a preliminary yet. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with both of those rules. So lots going on, very busy EPA.
Yeah, yeah, super busy. I think those critical ones being PFAS and the lead and copper rule is that those they've been looked at and talked about for so long, and it's just a matter of
Yeah.
time now before it's not an if, it's more of a when, right?
Yes.
So
Yep.
what about like the legislative side? I know this is generally more about like the funding elements and stuff at play with state revolving funds and that kind of stuff. What are you seeing there? What are you looking at? What are you trying to keep in mind for 2021?
Yeah, we're certainly waiting to see the FY21 omnibus bill that's supposed to be released later this week. So fingers crossed for increases in, SRF funding and some of the other pots of money from the feds there. And that, of course, includes funding for states. ASDWA is always, asking for robust funding for the states, so that way our programs can cover all of our duties. Some other things that we might see in 2021, there's always the chance of an infrastructure bill, right? I feel like every week is infrastructure week, but, it really could happen. And, of course, we said that under the Trump administration, because he ran on a platform that really emphasized infrastructure and his $1 trillion plan for infrastructure. And we didn't really see that come to fruition, but particularly with the climate change aspect of the Biden administration and an emphasis on infrastructure and building back better, I think was the slogan that they used. We could certainly see a big push for an infrastructure bill. The other big one we're looking at and thinking about is any potential COVID stimulus. And that could be kind of one of two options, one that's a stimulus bill that's really trying to help people survive, right? Kind of what we had back earlier in the spring, where we had like the individual checks that went out to people making under a certain amount annually, and support for small businesses. AWWA, WEF, some of the other associations have really been pushing Congress to include funds for water utilities who are not shutting off, for non-payment. So as utilities are seeing bills that are not being paid because people are struggling to, afford basic needs under, the current pandemic, water systems are losing revenue, and it in some cases is probably becoming critical. The other interesting piece of that is it could be more of a stimulant, like an economic stimulus, once we're kind of out. I don't want to say out of the woods, but once the economy is picking back up, and this would be probably similar to what we saw in 2009 with ARA and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, where we saw a really big infusion of money into the SRFs as a way to help stimulate the local economies. So we're keeping our eye out for that. We've provided, I know ASDWA's provided some information to a couple of different congressional offices, but this was back earlier in the year. So it's kind of TBD how Congress is going to handle that, but I think there's definitely is the possibility for some money in that regard coming into the sector. And then finally is the possibility of a ASDWA reauthorization bill. And, we know the House Democrats are really interested in making some changes to the Safe Drinking Water Act. we'll kind of have to see how the Senate shakes out with the races in Georgia. But we do know that the Senate is interested also in making at least a few kind of minor tweaks to CIDWA. They introduced the Drinking Water Infrastructure Act of 2020 this year. The House did not introduce an equivalent bill, and so we didn't really see that go anywhere. But I definitely think 2021 and possibly 2022, we are going to see a CIDWA reauthorization bill.
Yeah, yeah. No, what kind of pivoting a little bit away from Washington and more to kind of postulating things. I know that, like I said, you've been pretty vocal about your vision for the industry on Twitter and stuff, and I love reading the stuff that you have because I think it's always really insightful. But when it comes to policy, regulations, and legislation, could you explain a little bit more about what that vision entails and why you think it could be beneficial to kind of raise the tide for everyone, right? And it raises all ships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I should first maybe say that I kind of plagiarize freely from my colleagues, so I don't want to claim credit for the idea of, a national water vision, or water plan. But I do see it as a need in our industry, and for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, our sector is really highly fractured, basically at every level. At the federal level, we have multiple federal agencies that have a hand in water, from USGS, EPA, CDC, Army Corps. DOD now is involved with some of the PFAS efforts. So it's a really broad coalition of folks who have responsibility for water. Second is the associations. There's so many of us, and we represent so many different facets of the industry because it really is a huge industry. And then, of course, we have 150,000 water systems, 15,000 publicly owned treatment systems. And so we're fractured at the local level as well. And so you really see this at every level of our industry. And I think it's important that we have some broad goals that we're all working towards. And, when I'm talking to colleagues and stuff, I kind of liken it to we're like an armada, but we don't have an admiral, right? Nobody's in the lead boat showing us where to go. And so there's some excellent work that's being done by all of these different groups. I mean, really good stuff. Great research, utilities on the cutting edge, but it kind of all seems like we're rowing in different directions. And so I think it would be an awesome thing to get everybody together and to kind of set up some broad, a broad framework of here's where we want the industry to be in 50 years. In 100 years, we want to make sure, I mean, well, hopefully it wouldn't take 100 years for this, but we want to make sure every household in America has, clean and safe water. I think there are some basic principles that all of us could agree on. Infrastructure funding is another one that we tend to coalesce around. So I think, even though we represent different pieces of the industry, I think it'd be excellent to get folks together to start talking about how are we going to solve some of these big challenges we're facing, right? Climate change, workforce issues. Oh my gosh, that Brookings report that I reference in like every other tweet that talks about the workforce in the water sector and how it's increasingly people are eligible for retirement, and we're going to hit a critical point where operators they're not going to be plentiful anymore, and it's there's not going to be enough people to do the jobs that we need. How are we going to address that? And I think there are some real opportunities in having a national planning effort to lay that out. And when I say that, I don't think that it should be led necessarily, like it shouldn't just be a plan for the federal agencies, and it shouldn't just be a plan for the utilities or just the associations. It really needs to be, I think, everybody. And I know it might sound a little crazy to think about getting all of those people together, and it would be a huge effort. But thinking about something like the Sustainable Development Goals, where it's really a coalition of the willing, people who want to do it. Let's go ahead. If you're not interested, that's okay too. You can do your own thing. Yeah. But some of the principles I think that would be a part of a vision like that, and I don't want to put what I think we should do necessarily. I mean, I'd love to be a part of the conversation, but to be clear, this isn't Wendy's plan for America's water, right? But I do think that it needs to be collaborative. It needs to be long-term, right? So looking at timescales of like 50 to 100 years. And you might have seen, I did a presentation at the AWWA Virtual Summit earlier this summer with some other YPs. We talked about the piece I talked about was innovation, and I talked about a futures mindset. And this idea that you kind of take yourself out of your day to day and spend an hour a week, 10 minutes a day, whatever it is that you can set aside to think about some of the challenges that we're going to be facing in 20 years, or think about, what is the industry going to look like in 2050? What kind of things should I be doing now to be ready to rise to the occasion then? And I'm not really fascinated. It's my favorite happy hour topic. And so my friends, they love me. But it's, I do think it's something that our industry could be better at, is this kind of large scale coordination. And I just think that there's a lot of opportunity there for the water sector.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. I was actually talking to someone recently just about how, like you said, everything is so fractured, right? And when you think about like the energy sector, for example, they have like the Department of Energy, so we know like household use of energy per, like all these data
Mhm.
points at a federal level that help us understand things. And there's not really so much an equivalent for water. And like
No.
that kind of a thing could be hugely helpful in helping establish those principles moving forward of like, well, we know that this is the amount of gallons per household per day. What if we could drop that by just a tenth of a gallon over the course of like 15
Hmm.
years? How much would that save water wise in the entire country? Like that kind of stuff is hard to gauge because we don't really have the data at the highest level. We have it all at such the lowest level. Like talking
Right.
to someone at WEF recently, they were like, we are very data rich and information poor, and solving
Hmm.
the information poor
Great way to
side
put it.
would be, yeah, and solving the information poor side could be a huge boon for the industry at large.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a big, and this is not an ASDWA statement, this is a Wendi statement, but I am a very big proponent of consolidation, and there are multiple forms that can happen in. I'm not saying it needs to be necessarily pipe to pipe physical consolidation, but just thinking about the idea, if we had half as many or a third of many water systems as we have, the amount of time you could spend with each water system and the amount of data that you could collect and the amount of analysis you could do. I mean,
Mhm.
it really is at some level unmanageable the way we have built into it now. And what's crazy is if you sit back and think about, okay, knowing all the things I know now, and let's say we could just start from scratch in the nation about how we build our water and wastewater infrastructure, we would never do it how we have it set up today. So why are we
Mhm.
continuing to like feed this really tough system that we've cornered ourselves into? And so I think that if you really ask yourself that question, and this would be a great question to ask whoever's writing the national water plan, is what could we be working towards? If we have, what is our vision for what water should look like?
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of room to grow in terms of the One Water initiatives. I think there's a lot of like watershed scale planning and information sharing. Um, there's just a lot of room for growth. And I mean, I don't want to diminish the great success that the water sector has had over the last 100 and what 25 years that we've had
Yeah.
what is basically the modern water system. Um, you know, it's incredible the number of lives we save by
Mhm.
supplying clean drinking water and removing waste and disposing of that sanitary and reusing it. It's a resource
Mhm.
too. But it's incredible. The work we do is incredible, so I don't want to diminish that, but I am definitely always in the pursuit of progress, and so I'm not going to stop, and I don't think that others should either. I don't think we can get complacent. So I'd love to see an effort that drives a national water plan and sets some lofty goals for us to start working on. And I want to see us all rowing in the same direction. I think we'll get there faster.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I agree with you on the
So
consolidation
that's
thing.
kind of the reason that I am so vocal on Twitter. And yeah, thank goodness for Twitter. I can put all that out there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I totally agree with you on all those points. And I agree with you on the consolidation point too, because the other aspect of that is capital, right? If you consolidate
Sure.
some of these systems, their capital increases, they could probably do some better projects and really improve things maybe even faster. So overall, I think that there
Hmm.
are it's something to definitely explore, and I know it's been talked about for a long, long time, but no action has come from it. But maybe if we did
Right.
have all of us rowing in the same direction, there would be more interest in people getting into some of the same boats. So
Absolutely. I love this analogy.
I know it's very, very good.
Great.
I'm glad that you used it because it's perfect. So, well, before I let you go, why don't you give us a little bit more detail on how people can get involved? Like, say they're interested in what we've been talking about here today. How can they get more involved and share their voice and kind of their vision for what a water policy could look like from a national perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one is starting to talk about it, starting to think about it. You know, if it's not really something you thought about before, I think it's easy to kind of, um, it's super easy to just worry about what's right in front of you. And you know, I don't want to say that everybody has time to take a step back and think about things more broadly. But I would encourage it if you are interested in, you know, some of the things that Bob and I said today. If they struck a chord with you, you know, thinking about, God, you know, if I was in charge, what would I do? Right? What would I make water look like? You know, if I had Congress's ear, what would I say? Even just thinking about those things, I think is a good start. Second, I would say getting involved in the associations that best represent you and your group. You know, whether that's Rural Water Association or AWWA or you know Water and Waste Digest and writing some op-eds. I mean, goodness, there's the sky's really the limit. I mean, my personal favorite is Twitter because it forces me to condense my thoughts and you know, it's easy to kind of zip off really quick and I don't have to give it too
Mhm.
much thought. But you know, I would say getting involved in the organizations is a really great way to have your voice heard. And then really the last way is to call your Congress member, you know, call your reps, call your senators. I know it can seem really intimidating, but first of all, they're not going to be the ones answering the phone. So, you know, don't think that you're going to be like talking directly to the representative. You're going to be talking to somebody who's passionate about government and passionate about making their constituents' lives better. And, you know, you're not going to get into well, hopefully, I don't, you know, you shouldn't be getting into a political argument or anything like that. Don't think they're going to be like grilling you. They just want to take your concerns and listen to them. And so I think if you have ideas or you want to see your congressperson step up on water issues, I think calling them or writing them an email is an excellent place to start. In terms of resources, I mean, gosh, so many of the associations are doing really cool stuff. The Utility of the Future initiative, U.S. Water Alliance has a lot of cool stuff. I mean, there are resources out there for you, and you know, we're plentiful with resources. Sometimes we're not great about putting them, you know, marketing them, but they're there. They're on a shelf somewhere. So yeah, if you're interested in innovation or water policy, you know, every association, at least every large water association has resources on that. So, you know, if you're not sure where to start, feel free to send me an email. I don't know if I can put my, you know, information up on here or reach out
Yeah,
to
we
me
can
on
include it.
Twitter. I'm happy to connect you to the right person in DC if that's what you're looking for. But we're here to help for sure. So use us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Wendy. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and the passion is I can feel it from here. So I love that. I love talking to
Through
people
the
who are very,
screen.
yeah, I love talking to people who are so passionate about the work in this industry because it to me this industry does breed passion for the work that you do, and as I've heard many say, even if you leave the water industry, you never truly leave it. So
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I'm not leaving anytime soon, but thank you so much for having me on. This has been really fun.
awesome. Thanks.